Hi, I'm Chrissy Miles, and you're watching The Chrissy Miles Show, where I teach you how to take eternal truth and produce extreme results. In today's episode, I'm going to show you how to beat fear during the COVID-19 crisis. Probably since the virus, you have experienced a lot of fear if we're ever going to get back to normal, fear about what the future looks like. And today, what I want to help you do is to really develop a foundation for how you can overcome fear in your life once and for all, no matter what crisis comes your way. But first, subscribe to this channel and click the bell to get notified of more of my proven methods to get more out of life. Let's get started. Here's step number 1. Understand the source of fear. In Hebrews chapter 2, verses 14 and 15, the Bible says this: "Since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity." Now, I want to stop right there because this verse is specifically talking about one of the reasons why Jesus came in the form of a human being. So if God's plan was to redeem the world, to redeem his children who were flesh and blood, he had to provide a means that was an equivalent sacrifice to take the place of the wrath that was essentially on mankind because of their sin, because of the fall. So it says, because the children have flesh and blood, that Jesus shared in our humanity. And that's a really important point to make when you're thinking about fear and how to overcome fear, is that the things that Jesus did in this world, the miracles that he performed, the incredible, almost too good to be true, unexplainable things that he did, the way he loved people, he actually did all of those things out of his humanity. Now, you might find that difficult to believe because so often we've been taught that Jesus was performing miracles because he was the Son of God. He had that miraculous power to do that. Nobody else had that. Well, the reality is that the Bible teaches that Jesus emptied himself of everything that was divine in order to take on humanity. Now, back to the Hebrews chapter 2 passage. It says that part of the reason that he took on humanity was so that by his death, he would break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is the devil. That's verse 14. So part of the reason that Jesus came as a human being was literally to stand in the gap, to stand in the place of Adam and Eve. When Adam and Eve fell, so did the enemy. I believe that they fell at the exact same time. And at that moment, Satan held us hostage, meaning that if God were to judge Satan for the evils that he committed in this world, mankind was also culpable. He was also responsible. So to get rid of Satan, he would have had to get rid of mankind. That would be God's justice in that situation. So what Jesus did in becoming a human was to literally step into our place so that we could be set free. He would come in as a sacrifice, and he would break the power of the devil who held that power of death over us. You see, when Jesus stepped into our place and we were set free from the power that the enemy had over us, literally holding us hostage from the situation, or in a situation where if God were to judge Satan, he would have to judge us. But when Jesus stepped into our place and we were put into a path of safety, no longer did the devil have any power over us or have any power of death over us, because we now were set free. And in verse 15, it says this. It says that Jesus then freed all of those who all of their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. You see, when you understand the source of all fear, you begin to realize how to overcome that fear. According to this passage, our primary source of fear is rooted in the fear of death. In fact, so many people are in slavery due to the fear of death that it becomes very difficult to really overcome any kind of fear. You can trace every root fear back to the fear of death. You have fear of losing your job? Why is that? Because you won't be able to provide a roof over your home for your children or yourself, your spouse, your family. You won't have any money to put food on the table. And all of these things start coming back to a core fear of, I might die if I don't have a home to live in, or if I don't have any money to put food on the table. Your fear of snakes? Why? Because they might bite you and you might die. You see, every fear has its root source in the fear of death. But when you understand that Jesus overcame death and he stood in our place, then the fear of death can be completely broken off of you, and therefore you have the ability to rise above your circumstances and to never allow fear to affect you again. So have you been struggling with fear during the COVID-19 crisis? Let me know in the comments below if you've been having a difficult time overcoming fear and what we can do to help you get re-centered on the truth. Here's step number 2. Lessen the value you place on worldly things. In Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 21, in the Message, it says this: "Don't hoard treasures down here where it gets eaten by moths and corroded by rust, or worse, stolen by burglars. Stockpile treasure in heaven where it's safe from moth and rust and burglars." It's obvious, isn't it? The place where your treasure is the place you will most want to be and end up being. So I love what Jesus is teaching in this parable, where he is showing people the importance of not placing value on worldly things. You know, in the last few weeks, we've all experienced situations with hoarding. Maybe you've been the one that's hoarding all the toilet paper, or maybe you're going to the store looking for the things that you normally like to have, but it's simply out. Why? Because people are afraid. And when people are afraid, they tend to hoard their treasures down here. But look at what Jesus said. He says, when you hoard your treasures here in this earthly realm, there are so many factors that could affect the treasures that you're holding on to. It could be eaten by moths. It could be corroded by rust. It could be stolen by people, right? There's so many ways that you can lose the effects that you have in this world, your personal effects, which is why he cautions people to store up your treasures in heaven. Now, you might ask yourself, how do I do that? How do I store up my treasure in heaven? And there's a lot to it. I don't have time to go into the details of it, but I believe one of the key things that you can do to store up your treasure in heaven is simply by walking in faith and doing something by faith every single day. But the point in this particular passage is stop valuing worldly things. Why? Because what can they do to save you, right? If you run out of everything in your whole house, those things weren't the things that were really sustaining you anyway. You might think that they're sustaining you, but worldly things are not what ultimately sustain your life unto eternity, which is what life is really all about, stepping into that eternity now in preparation for the future. So when you lessen the value you place on worldly things, it helps to reduce the kind of fear that we have if we'll run out. You know, if we run out of toilet paper, then I guess we'll have to come up with something else to take care of our business, right? If we run out of food at the grocery store, then we'll all go back to farming and trading and bartering, right? If you've been to a different country or a developing nation, you will realize very quickly that it is possible to thrive and survive on way, way, way less than what we have in our country. So even though you might be missing some of your favorite things, it could be a lot worse. And if you continue to reduce the value that you place on worldly things, you'll find out in the end that you can actually survive on much, much less than what we've gotten accustomed to in our society. For more tips on overcoming fear during the COVID-19 crisis, I want to invite you to download a free MP3 that I'm calling The Vaccination Against Every Problem. In this 4-part series, I want to show you what steps you can take to ensure that no matter what problems arise in the world, both now and in the future, you're going to have the ability to overcome. So follow the link in the description. Here's step number 3. Increase the value you place on eternal things. Look at 2 Corinthians chapter 4. It says, "For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all." So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. So Paul is writing to the Corinthian church, and of course, he experienced a lot of trouble in his life. He suffered physical plights. He was shipwrecked multiple times. He went without food. He was on the open sea for a day and a night, he said. And he went through all kinds of persecution on top of that. He was beaten. Some people even think that he was actually beaten unto death and stoned in certain places in Asia, like in Ephesus, and that he was actually raised back to life. So for Paul to say that the difficulties we experience in this world are light and momentary. I mean, this was a guy who was stoned and flogged and put in prison, and he looked at all the troubles that he had faced, and he said, this is nothing. None of this is much to write home about, even though he wrote about a lot of the details of it. But he goes on to tell us that in order to increase the value that we place on eternal things, to start fixing your eyes on things that are not seen. So everything that we see in this world is temporary. You know, you've probably experienced this during the crisis. One of the ways that we overcome this fear that we've been having is just kind of thinking about the future. You know, thinking about the great summer we're going to have or the great Christmas we're going to have with our family again. And in thinking about the future, we remind ourselves, not everything is eternal in this world. Things are very, very temporary. And that's a good thing for us because that means that we can place our hope in the future on things that we don't see to help us to overcome the fear that we're experiencing right now. So if you've been experiencing a lot of fear during this crisis, start to meditate and think about the things that you can't quite see. And that could be re-engaging with your family again over a wonderful meal together. It could be spending time with your grandkids, doing things at the beach or at the lake. It could be visiting with your friends again and in church. All of those things, even though you can't see them right now, when you increase the value you place on the things that are unseen, what that does is it really causes a joy and an imagination to come up in your heart, which connects you to eternal things, which helps to lift your spirits, take you out of a place of fear and put you into a place of peace. This is how you overcome fear during this crisis. Here's step number 4. Trust God to take care of your needs. In Matthew chapter 6, Jesus is teaching the disciples another parable, and he explains to them how you can trust God to take care of you. So he says this, he says, when you pray, don't keep on babbling like pagans do, for they think they're going to be heard because of their many, many words. He says, no, don't be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. And then he goes on to explain to us, this is how we should pray. And he, of course, explains to us the Lord's Prayer. Now, most of us are pretty familiar with the Lord's Prayer, and I believe one of the key elements in that prayer that Jesus spoke about and told us to guide our lives with is that he prayed something very interesting, and that is for God's will to be done on earth as it is in heaven. Now, the beauty of this description that Jesus gives us is that he actually is the central focus or the central reason why we are able to access the things of heaven and bring them into the earth. So when he was teaching his disciples, he says, listen, first of all, realize that just by begging God and talking on and on and on and asking and begging and pleading God to do something, to think that this is what's going to get God's attention and cause him to work on your behalf is really what pagans do. So that's a pretty strong rebuke from Jesus in this particular passage of scripture. And I believe that we can take that to heart as Christians. If you're a Christian and you're praying and babbling on and begging God and thinking that the more you pray about this issue, the more he's going to hear you because you're praying a lot about it, Jesus tells us right here that this is not how God works and operates. He says, don't be like them. He says, when you come to the Father, you have to understand that your Father already knows what you need before you even ask him. So instead of asking God to do a bunch of things for you when he already knows what you need, he says, instead, pray that God's will would be done on earth as it is in heaven. Well, how does God's will get done on earth as it is in heaven? The first thing that happens is that you believe and trust that Jesus was actually the gateway between heaven and earth. So understanding that Jesus opened up the path for heaven's will to be done on earth is a huge part of understanding that God can take care of all of your needs. And second of all, believing and trusting that that pathway is always open, meaning that you don't have to go back and forth to God every time that you have a need and ask Him all over again to engage or to help take care of you. If you want to overcome fear in this world, you have to trust that God knows what your needs already are, and He has made a pathway or a gateway through Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection that opens up the will of heaven to be done here on this earth. And the way that we participate in that is first by believing in it, and second of all, by acting it out. You've seen during this crisis so many people who have activated their faith, right? We have nurses and doctors and hospital workers who are praying for their patients, and they're encouraging one another. We have people making masks and shields for the healthcare workers, right? We have people making lunches, school lunches for the children who can't be in school right now. This is an example of how we see God's will in heaven done here on earth. We step into that path because we're trusting God to take care of our needs, and therefore we have energy left over to take care of other people. This is how we overcome fear during the crisis. Here's step number 5. Make a choice not to fear. You're all familiar with the 23rd Psalm, but I'll read it here for you. It says, "The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me by still waters. He restores my soul. He guides me along paths of righteousness for His name's sake. And even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for You are with me." You see, David understood what it meant to walk through the valley of the shadow of death. But he said, even though I am walking here and I'm experiencing these dark shadows, this evil all around me, he said that he would make a choice not to fear. You know, fear really is a choice. It's not something that just happens to us. You might be hit with certain circumstances. You might be hit with certain situations that feel like they're out of your control, much like all of us are during this point in time. But you have a choice as to whether or not you are going to operate in fear, or the opposite would be operating in faith. And the key to overcoming and making a choice not to fear is to know the Good Shepherd. When you know the Good Shepherd, the shepherd who takes care of your needs, who helps you to lie down in pastures that are green, who leads you beside still waters, who anoints your head with oil, who prepares a table for you in the presence of your enemies. When you know God as your Good Shepherd, you can actually make a conscious choice not to fear. He says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Why? Because You are with me. If you believe that God is truly with you, then there really should be no need to fear. And you can choose not to fear by putting your hope in the Lord as the shepherd of your life, knowing that He'll take care of you no matter what crisis comes your way, no matter what difficulty that we experience. He's going to cause you to prosper in the midst of very difficult situations if you choose not to fear. Thanks for watching today, and I hope you enjoyed these tips about how to beat fear during the COVID-19 crisis. If you like this video, please hit the thumbs up button, and if you know someone who's been struggling with fear since the shutdown started, share this video with them. If you haven't done so yet, make sure you subscribe to this channel for new episodes each Tuesday where I teach you how to get more out of life. Thanks for watching.